Welcome to this tutorial on building an Android application. Today we're going to be building a note-taking app where the user can enter some text, submit it, and then refer back to it later. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to build an activity within an Android application. Now an activity represents a single screen within an Android app. So the home screen is really just an activity. And in this first tutorial we're going to be designing the home screen or the home activity for this app. Now each activity has two components. It has the main or the activity.java file that contains the Java code that's going to tell the app what to do. The second component is the .xml file for an activity. This is where you design the components for your activity. So I've gone ahead and actually done some pre-designing here so we wouldn't have to spend any time on that. And you can see that for this home page it's going to have a title, it's going to have a text box where the user can enter text, a submit button, and then it's going to output the text back to the user. Now the reason I'm not going over this is because it's a very intuitive interface. Android allows you to just do a drag and drop, so if I wanted another text box I could just drag it over and leave it there. So designing is very quick and easy with Android. The only thing I do want to mention about the .xml file is whenever you add a component to your activity, like edit text, make sure to come down here to the side and give it a unique ID. That's going to make your life a lot easier later. So what I do want to go over in this tutorial is how to actually interact with these elements that you've designed within your main activity.java file. So if we hop over here to the .java file, we can see that this is the default code that Android Studio gives us. Now you see this method here called onCreate. Whenever an activity starts, the onCreate method is called. So when our activity is booting up, this is the code it's going to run. So we want to put our kind of main code within this onCreate method. So if we want to interact with these elements inside of this activity.xml, we're going to need to create objects, just like you would in Java. Java is an object-oriented programming languages, so we're going to make objects for our various components. So the first thing I'm going to do is a text view object. Now this text view is going to represent this text box right here, and we're going to say text view user input, and we're not actually going to instantiate it yet. Alright, so I went ahead and added the two other objects that we're going to need, our button, our submit button, and our output text view. Let's talk about how we're going to actually extract these objects from the XML file and interact with them in our .java file. So Android actually comes with a very handy method that's going to take care of most of this for us. It's called find view by ID right here. And what we're going to pass into it is the ID of our object that we're looking for. So let's start with the edit text. Now the way we're going to extract this ID is this helper called R. So it's just built into Android and it allows us to extract our elements by using their unique ID. So I'm going to say r.id. And after I do that, you can see that these IDs that I gave our unique elements pop up in this screen. So I called this thing edit text. So that's what I'm going to put in here. Now we need to store it in this object user input. So I'm going to say user input equals, and you can see right now it's yelling at me because I actually have to cast this object that it's giving me to a text view. And just like that, we now can interact with this element within our XML file inside of our .java file. Alright guys, so I went ahead and added or instantiated our other two objects that we want to interact with. So now we need to make them do something. Like I mentioned earlier, all this home screen is going to do is allow the user to enter text, hit the submit button, and then output the text back to them. So the way we're going to do this, for those familiar with Java, is just event-driven programming. For those who are not familiar with this concept, I'm not really going to talk about it here, but it's basically when an event happens, the event here being that the user hits the submit button, execute a certain action. So we're going to do it, it's just like the Java syntax, button.setOnClickListener, and we're going to pass it in a new view.onClickListener, just like that, and do our parentheses. Now, inside any onClickListener, we have to override the onClick method. Now that's the code that runs when the user clicks whatever button we're referring to, in this case the submit button. So public void onClick, it takes in a view v, that part's not really important. So this code inside here is going to run whenever the user clicks the submit button. So what do we want to happen when the user clicks the submit button? we want to extract the text inside this user input text box and set it to this output text. And we're going to do that just kind of the way you would anticipate we would. So create a new string and say user input, that's the text box, dot get text, just like that. And it actually returns it as a character array, so we're just going to toString it. And there, right now, whenever the user clicks submit, it's going to extract the text inside of our text box and put it in a string. Well, now we need to set the text of our output text. Output text dot set text, and just pass it in our string. And then just like that, we have our main activity done. Now let's actually test it to make sure it's working. Now Android, if you have an Android device, you can actually test it natively on the device. If you don't, you can just run an emulator inside of Android Studio. So when I click Run App, it's going to open up this emulator creation interface. So if you don't already have one made, I happen to, but you can just come down here, create a new emulator, and test it like that. I'm just going to use the one I already have made, so we click OK, and it's going to launch it up for us. Alright, so we have our emulator up and running, and let's just see if this app is doing what we expect it to do. So we're going to type in some text right here, hello. We're going to click submit, and you can see down here it outputs hello. We can say hello world, submit again, and it outputs down here hello world. So those are the basics for creating an activity within an Android app.